You're listening to the PJF Podcast, a show dedicated to decoding elite sports performance and fitness. I'm Paul Fabritz, and I'm an MBA strength and conditioning and performance trainer. If you want to become superhuman, take your fitness, and take your sports performance to the next level, this is the podcast for you. Let's do it. All right, what's up, guys? We got a special guest for the podcast today, Patrick McKeown. He is the author of The Oxygen Advantage, a great book that I've been talking about on the podcast for a while. So it's an honor to have him here. Thanks for being here, Patrick.
It's great to be here, Paul. Thanks very much.
You want to give us like a quick background on how you became kind of the nasal breathing guy and maybe kind of where this stuff came from, because you make it a point in the book that you didn't create this out of thin air. This has been around for thousands of years. So give us a little background on yourself and kind of how you discovered this stuff.
Yeah, totally by accident. I've never encouraged anybody to go into the field of breathing if they want to try and make a living from it. So I came across it because of having asthma. But in school, I was falling asleep at the desk and I had undiagnosed obstructive sleep apnea, but I didn't know that until about 20 years later. I was a chronic mouth breather during physical exercise, during rest and during sleep. I used to wake up with a dry mouth every morning. And I'd be tired waking up and trying to focus and concentrate. It's not that easy. And I came across a newspaper article back in 1997, 98, and it spoke of the work of this Russian doctor who was working with astronauts during the Soviet space race. And his work was designed and determined the composition of oxygen, for example, in the capsule. And he spoke about two things. He said that your breathing should always be in and out through the nose. And he said that your breathing should be light. And mine was none of those things. And it was that day that I started focusing. I did the nose unblocking exercise because you can open up your nose by simply holding your breath. Like even if you just breathe in and out and hold your nose and walk around while holding your breath, you can open up your nose. I did that. And I started switching to nasal breathing, and I taped my mouth closed at night. The first morning waking up, I don't notice much of a difference. But the second night I did it again. I woke up. It was the best night's sleep I had in about 15 years. My breathing also improved. And one thing that also helped was that I felt calmer. I never realized that by chronic mouth breathing, which is engaging the upper chest and you're breathing faster, like any time that we have a habit of breathing faster and upper chest, it's pushing us into this stress response. Because our physiology, however we breathe, we are telling the brain where we're at. And I think it's very important for people to realize that if you control your breathing, you can change your states. And Paul, yeah, I put it into my own way of life. I never thought I was going to end up teaching it. And it was a couple of years later that I felt that I really should be going down this road. And it's been the best road ever. You know, I'm teaching it now full time, 20 years, come the 17th of March, which is about 2 weeks' time. 2022. So it's been a wonderful journey.
Wow, that's awesome. And so, yeah, like this has been done for thousands of years. Why do you think that there's like a gap in the popularity? Like this was popular thousands of years ago, and you mentioned that it's something that, you know, a parent would close the baby's mouth because they knew intuitively that nasal breathing is so good for them. And then my generation did not get any of this. Like my parents didn't know this. Their parents didn't know this. Why is this just now being brought back up? And why is it just not popular?
I think it was because it was taught incorrectly. I think the people who monopolized breathing were not giving it the credit, and they didn't fully understand what was going on. And I'm not going to say that I understand, but I understand a little bit more in terms of the biochemistry, the biomechanics and resonance frequency breathing, stressor exercises, relaxation exercises. It's important not just focus on one dimension of breathing. It's like going into a gym. You can focus on one particular training, but that's not all what it's about. A skilled instructor or trainer is able to tweak different physical movements for that individual. And the same goes with breathing. Breathing is complex and it's multidimensional. It wasn't taught correctly, because if it was taught correctly, it would have caught on. And this idea about the usefulness of taking this big breath, or, you know, the more air you breathe, the better. What a load of nonsense. So there's a lot of airy-fairy that come into it and woo-woo as well. And this put people off, when you start talking about angels and crystals, and not there's anything wrong with that. I want breathing for the people. I want it that we all should have an understanding of how we can reach our full potential. And I would show the connection between breathing and our sleep, because that was huge. How many people are waking up with a dry mouth in the morning? They're not feeling refreshed, and they're going to be more likely to have mental fatigue, but their focus, their concentration, their attention span is impacted. How many people have dysfunctional breathing? Because physical exercise doesn't necessarily mean that you've got good breathing patterns. It's very common for athletes to have dysfunctional breathing, many walks of life. And the factors that contribute to dysfunctional breathing are trauma, which is going to affect any of us, high stress levels, perfectionist tendencies, hormonal changes in female, asthma, childhood asthma, and genetic predisposition. So there's quite a few influences which change our breathing. And some people naturally have a really good breathing composure. But when it comes to physical exercise, how you breathe during physical exercise is determined by how you breathe outside of your physical exercise. How is the individual breathing while they are resting? How are they breathing while they walk down the street? How are they breathing during their sleep? And if we do all of physical exercise solely with the mouth open, we're missing out on a fundamental. And I'm not going to say with professional athletes or even serious athletes to have all of your physical exercise with the mouth closed. No. But what I would say is that by adopting and understanding breathing and bringing it into the physical exercise, we can add extra load onto the body and cause the body to make adaptations, including protecting the airways, increasing oxygen uptake in the blood, increasing oxygen delivery to the tissues, recovery, and also preparation the night before. So pre-event, getting a good night's sleep, how to down-regulate if you're feeling too ramped up. So an individual who's going into a game, you want to be going in this flow state. And, when I'm working with people, I'm saying, I want you to go out onto that field, out onto that pitch, with every cell dispersed throughout the body, where the athlete and the game becomes one, that you're in that state of mind where you're both relaxed and you're alert at the same time. Now, to achieve this coveted flow state, to bring our attention into the part of the brain that we're fully immersed in the present moment and that our attention is moving simultaneously with time, we develop that by our practice outside of the game. And in order to be able to attain flow states, we need good sleep and we need functional breathing and we need good concentration. And concentration is our ability to hold our attention on one thing with 100% of our attention, despite what's going on. And the measure of any leader, if you see, you're watching a game and the team is performing poorly, and all it takes is one good individual to raise the spirits and get everybody back on track, that individual is not suffering from mental fatigue. And that individual has a one-directed attention that regardless of what's going on, they're able to remain fixed on the game. This is where our physiology comes in. So, when you delve a little bit deeper, I had cold hands and feet continuously. I remember as a teenager and as a kid, very often having brain fog. And I also, when I started practicing to breathe less air for short periods of time, I was able to improve the temperature of my fingers. Now, of course, you're not just improving your blood circulation into your hands, but you're improving blood circulation throughout the body. So from an athletic point of view, I would say that we can change states, we can improve the buffering capacity, so we can improve the body's ability to delay lactic acid and fatigue. We can improve respiratory muscle strength that the diaphragm is less likely to fatigue. We can also improve functional breathing because there's a relationship between functional breathing and functional movement. When people talk about the core, it's not just the abs. We have to think of the diaphragm. We have to think of the pelvic floor. We have to think of the abs, and we have to think of the spinal muscles. The diaphragm is one of those things. And it's with optimal movement of the diaphragm that it provides stabilization for the spine. So there's a lot going on in terms of performance from a mental point of view, but also from a physical point of view. And even going as far as saying that there was a study that came out in 2020 or 2021 that was conducted in Israel, and they looked at athletes who were breathing in and out through the nose. It improved visuospatial awareness. And I think this is very interesting because you can imagine somebody out on the field, they need to be focusing on the ball, but they also need to be reading and scanning everything that's going on around them. And we're starting to see the research going on. Another 2018 paper looking at rugby union players, and these guys are highly trained, and got 21 highly trained professional rugby union players, divided them into two groups. One group did 40-meter sprints with normal breathing. The other group did 40-meter sprints with breath holding. Same breath hold as we do. Exhale, hold for 40 meters. And they were doing a departure every 30 seconds. And within 4 weeks, the group who were doing the breath hold sprinting, their repeated sprint ability increased from 9.8 reps to 14.8 in 4 weeks. And the group that were doing normal breathing during sprinting had a marginal change. Now, if we think about repeated sprint ability in team sports, it's a measure of performance. It's the athlete's ability to do an all-out effort followed by a very brief recovery before an all-out effort again. And to get that gain, and the reason being is because breathing hasn't been taken into consideration. So here is a whole minefield that has been untapped. And by doing breath holds, and I'd say as well, don't do anything to the extreme. It's very important to gently acclimatize your body to it. You know, there's nothing extreme in this, even though I'm talking about 40-meter sprint. The way we do it, I don't follow the protocol of Warons because I think it's quite tough. Now, we push and we challenge, but we want to make sure that we're doing it within the limits as well and gently building it up over time. So I think it's wonderful. You know, it's taken off in the last 3 years. So it took me 20 years to be an overnight success. So, but it's happening.
Yeah, that's how it usually works. So since we're talking about breathing in exercise, one of the things, like I'll get these high-level NBA players, they're in really good shape already, and I'll get them to do just a 5-minute nasal breathing cardio warm-up, kind of zone 2, where I feel like anybody should be able to get through this, and they do, and they feel good. But when it gets to more of the anaerobic stuff, they feel like they just can't do it through the nose and they have to go to mouth breathing. Do you think it's possible to get through like a basketball game with just nasal breathing, or are you going to have to go to that kind of survival mechanism of using the mouth?
Anytime I'm working with a competitive athlete, I would never expect them to have 100% nasal breathing. But what I really do want them to do is to adapt some nasal breathing to get the body to make those adaptations. Now, it is tougher when you switch from mouth to nose breathing. And probably it wouldn't be great to do it during match practice session because the air hunger can be quite strong. So when you first adapt from mouth to nose breathing, carbon dioxide is not able to leave the body so quickly because the nose is a smaller entry and exit to the mouth. So when you do your physical exercise with your mouth closed, your metabolism is producing a lot of carbon dioxide. But because the carbon dioxide isn't able to leave the body quickly enough, carbon dioxide increases in the blood. This is why you feel the increased sensation of air hunger. But this is where it's beneficial, because when you expose your body then to the increased carbon dioxide, your body adapts to an increased CO2 tolerance. And then your breathlessness on the field, on the court, is going to be reduced. Now, in one study by Professor George Dallam in 2018, now he got 10 recreational athletes and he got them breathing exclusively through their nose for 6 months, and then he tested them. And they were able to achieve 100% of their work rate intensity with nasal breathing versus mouth breathing on a graded exercise test. But with nasal breathing, they had 22% less ventilation. So the thing about nasal breathing is that if you do some of your training, and I would say typically about 40, 50%, your body will make those adaptations. And then when you're going out onto the field and on board, you're not going to be breathing as hard. And as a result, then you're less likely to gas out. Now, there's plenty of examples of, you know, you could have two athletes and both are the same age and Many things are very similar. They do the same training, but one might have disproportionate breathlessness. You have to ask, why does this athlete have disproportionate breathlessness? Why are they gassing out too soon? Why do they not have a reserve there? That's when dysfunctional breathing is kicking in. So it's that person's everyday breathing that is kicking in during the game as well. Now, a person's ability to breathe through their nose during physical exercise will be influenced by bolt score, but also by nasal airway. And there is a genetic predisposition towards being able to breathe through your nose. So the black guys, they have a better nasal airway. And you'll often find that they will be able to do full high intensity exercise with their mouth closed. We had one of the MMA fighters at the weekend who's been trained by one of our coaches. And I can't think of his name, the athlete, but watching the fight, his recovery was nasal breathing. And this is pretty much high intensity. This is UFC level. That the thing about nose breathing, when you can adapt it, you have a much better recovery and you have better oxygen delivery. But I would combine, I suppose we need to look at the big picture here. Sleep, everyday breathing, breath hold exercises. So we want to improve the everyday breathing pattern, but we also want to stress the body and mind at the same time. And it's the combination that can contribute towards performance.
Right. That's interesting to think about the genetic component. I never really thought about that. So let's go back there's people who haven't read the book. You mentioned the BOLT score, and that's kind of like an initial assessment that you kind of want to do. Can you take us through that BOLT test?
Yeah, so the BOLT score, it's a simple breath hold time. And what I'd say is don't get too hung up about what you get. It's only to give you an indicator. You'd want to be sitting down for about 5 minutes, just with normal breathing. And then take a normal breath in and out through your nose and pinch your nose with your fingers. And you time it in seconds, how long you can hold your breath for until you feel the first definite desire to breathe. Or you might have the first involuntary movement of the diaphragm, or you might feel a swallow in the throat. So you're measuring how long it takes after you have a normal exhalation. How long does it take until you feel the first definite desire to breathe or the first involuntary movement of the diaphragm? And then when you let go, your breathing should be fairly normal. So it's not a maximum length of your breath hold. You want to try and have fairly normal breathing at the end of it. Now, the significance of it is this, that Professor Kyle Kiesel published a study in 2018. He's a professor of physical therapy from Evansville University, Kiesel. He got 51 individuals and he looked at their breathing from a biochemical point of view, biomechanical and psychophysiological point of view. And that's pretty cumbersome because that's normally the way that you would assess functional breathing patterns. You look at their breathing across a number of different dimensions. His conclusion was that the breath hold time is a simple screening tool. And if your BOLT score is above 25 seconds, there is an 89% chance that dysfunctional breathing is not present. Now, many athletes listening to this could be surprised that even though they're at a high level, they may have a BOLT score of 15 seconds. And that 15 seconds will translate into disproportionate breathlessness. So for a given intensity of exercise, your breathing is harder and faster. But also, when you have a low BOLT score, you typically have a faster respiratory rate. You're more likely to breathe upper chest. And that can impact your states of mind. Because we, Paul, as human beings, whenever we get into a tricky situation, we naturally respond with hyperventilation. But some people have great resilience and they don't respond that way. I had to develop mine. Whenever I get into a tricky situation, I'd be ramped up. And the reason that I'd be ramped up is because I was already ramped up anyway. And the tricky situation just pushed me a little bit more. That whenever we get into a difficult situation, we can naturally respond with faster breathing pattern and an upper chest breathing. And this breathing pattern is telling the brain that the body is under threat. And all the brain wants to do is to get us the hell out of the situation as quick as possible. It's not a time for planning, and it's not a time for coming up with a good solution. But the thing about the breath is that how we breathe, we are communicating this to the brain. So when somebody gets into a tricky situation, so you can imagine you've got an athlete and they're after having a bad night's sleep and they have an important game on. And some of these young kids, There's a lot of pressure on them. And they have an important game, say, the next day. And that night they have their mouth open and they're faster breathing and they're thinking and thinking and thinking. They can't switch off their mind. And they wake up and they're feeling pretty lousy. Now, bad way to start the day, but that's going to add to a stress response. And just before the game is, their anxiety is kicking in, even though they mightn't admit to anxiety. And that's normally when we say to athletes, listen, this isn't about anxiety. This is about changing your state. I would want to down-regulate them. And I typically down-regulate them by doing the breathe like from the book. Take a very soft breath in through the nose and a really relaxed and a slow and a gentle exhalation. So this could be an hour before the event or a half an hour before the event. A very soft breath coming into the nose and a really relaxed and a slow and a gentle exhalation. And we'll often get them to do this during the warm-up. Because when you have that slow and relaxed exhalation, you're telling the brain that everything is okay. And the brain will send signals of calm accordingly. So you can, if you're ramped up, you need to down-regulate. But if you're too lethargic, you need to up-regulate. So then during the warm-up, what I have them do is I have them breathe light, breathe slow, breathe low. That's to change states. I then have them do 3 or 4 easy breath holds just to get their body, get them out of the too relaxed state and stress them a little bit. And then I'll have them do 5 strong breath holds to increase blood flow to the brain, to open up the nose, to open up the lungs, to cause the spleen to release red blood cells into circulation. And it's the same warm-up routine that they would normally have. And all we do is we bring in the understanding of light, slow, and low breathing and nose breathing during the warm-up, a few breath holds, a few easy ones, and a few strong ones. And then for that individual to go out with every cell of their body and to be fully concentrated on what they're doing. But, mindfulness, and I don't want to bring in, mindfulness is a wonderful thing, and we start to see it more coming into sports. But mindfulness is not going to address the physiology necessarily. I want to go direct into the physiology. And I'll give you this example. I work with elite military snipers. These guys are based in Europe. They are highly trained. Now, these guys physically exercise 1 to 2 hours every single day. They're young people. They're in their 30s. And they typically have to work in shifts of 1 hour at a time. And they're sitting behind the sight of a rifle. And their attention cannot waver, because if they go into dreamland, something can happen and they miss an opportunity. I was brought in to show them when to pull the trigger. And this is very simple when you know about physiology. And I'm just kind of putting this idea out there because sometimes we don't have a realization that we can change our physiology. So when it comes to the breath, during the inhalation, the vagus nerve steps back. So it's kind of more under the body's stress response. And the exhalation, which is the breath out, that's primarily under the control of the body's relaxation response. So during rest, the inhalation is a stress response, the exhalation, relaxation response. When to pull that trigger? Do you pull the trigger during the inhalation? Do you breathe in and hold your breath and pull the trigger? Do you breathe in and start breathing out and pull the trigger? Or do you breathe in, breathe out, and pull the trigger at the end of the exhalation? Now, when we think of the breath itself, the time to pull the trigger is between heartbeats, because the movement of the heart will knock the person off target. How do we lengthen the distance between heartbeats? During the inhalation, the heartbeat increases. So the time between heartbeats is shorter. So that's not the time to do it. During the exhalation, when we have a slow and prolonged exhalation, the vagus nerve, which is a nerve wandering throughout the human body, it secretes a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. And acetylcholine causes the heart rate to slow down. It increases the distance between beats. And the time to pull the trigger then is between the heartbeat. Just simple stuff. Now you can imagine then somebody coming up to take a shot and they're ramped up. That can throw them off. How do you downregulate? As you're walking up to it, nobody even knows you're doing it. You're breathing in through your nose and have that slow and prolonged exhalation, because you have all of this psychological pressure around you and you need to be able to step out of that. And there is a time that when we're too ramped up that we make mistakes. When we're too stressed, we make mistakes. When we're too relaxed, we make mistakes. We want to get into that balance. So coming up to the shot, take the soft breath in through your nose and just gently allow a prolonged and relaxed exhalation. And I understand that individuals in the game are a bit gassed out, but even slow down your breathing a little bit, because it's the slow breath out, especially during the exhalation, that will help recovery. So during timeout, recover, because every time that you regain your energy, you've some reserve left in the tank. And I'll just bring in a little bit of balance, because I know, sorry, I'm talking too much now. But say, for example, special forces, they're going into a tricky situation. They have traditionally applied the breathing technique called box breathing. And box breathing is to get that balance in the autonomic nervous system. You don't want to be too stressed because you're liable to make mistakes, but you don't want to be too relaxed either. So they will breathe in for 4 seconds, hold the breath for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds, hold the breath. It's the same idea. So it's the same, there's so many different, like we work with about 26 different exercises, and there's so many similarities there. And as you said at the start, none of this stuff is new. This stuff has been around, but it got lost, and it has got lost.
Yeah, no, I love it. That's so interesting, especially with the snipers that you're working with, because they have to be so focused. You see that same level of focus in the greatest shooters of all time. When you look at Steph Curry, just his level of relaxation, he's at a whole different level. You could just see it in the muscular tension. There's just no tension. And then the guy who can't shoot is just walking around, can't rotate, can't move. Everything is high tension. And I think a lot of that some of that definitely comes down to like, he's put in so many reps that he's earned the right to be relaxed and confident. But I think a lot of it does come back to the breathing as well. You're mentioning kind of the practical takeaways like box breathing. When would you incorporate box breathing? Is that before a game? Is that like timeouts? At a dead ball, shooting free throws? So yeah, I'm assuming this isn't something you're doing in a game, but like in a timeout or before a game?
You could do it before the game. Box breathing is typically done when an individual is sitting down. Now, what I like to do with athletes or have them do is I like to bring the understanding of breathing into their warm-up. And I also have to be conscious that when I'm working with some athletes, when I mention the word pre-match anxiety, they immediately say, I don't have pre-match anxiety. So now I never mention the word pre-match anxiety. But we're talking about getting into that flow state. I use the warm-up as a means because they're already doing it. And switching to nasal breathing, light breathing, slow breathing, low breathing. And it also causes, as you get warmer, as your muscles start to produce more heat, they're also producing more carbon dioxide. And it's the combination of the increased temperature and increased production of CO2 that more oxygen is getting to that muscle. So the warm-up per se is not just to avoid injury, but it's to prepare that muscle for increased oxygen prior to going out and doing more intense exercise. But we typically do use it to change the states, but then to bring in a few breath holds. Now, you could have an athlete, say, for instance, going to the game and they're feeling a little bit ramped up. Why not do some box breathing? Breathe in for 4 seconds, breathe, hold your breath for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds. And something else that I think is really important, depending on the personality of the athlete. I'm an introvert, even though it mightn't sound like now, because I talk about this subject because I kind of know it and I enjoy it. But at a party, I'm not going to be the guy roaming around the room. I'll be stuck in a corner somewhere, maybe talking to one person. That's all I'll do. I have to be conscious of conserving my own energy. And if I go to do a public presentation, I'm going out on stage and talking to a big audience, I don't want to talk to anybody before the event. I'll arrive, I'll bring my attention inwards, I'll sit in the corner and I'll hide there, and I use my own, and I want to hold on to every bit of energy that I have. And I think it's important to bring this into mind, because you will have some players who are extroverts and they don't lose energy by talking to everybody, but you have some players who are introverts, and those introverts, by bringing their attention inwards and conserving energy. We want to conserve every bit of energy we have for the game, and using not just because even mental fatigue can kick in with any of us. But if you think that most points are scored, regardless of the sport, in the last 5 minutes, most points, meaning that one team is after getting tired, not just physically, but they've got tired mentally. It's not just enough to train the body. We have to train the brain.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you say breathe light, I think in the book you gave a good cue about like the nasal hairs, like moving the nasal hairs or not being able to move the nasal. Can you go into that a little bit? Because I think that actually helped me switch over. I think I was kind of breathing too hard in and out, and I think when I got that cue, that helped a lot. So can you give that one your thoughts on that?
So say, for example, if somebody is sitting down now, just bring your attention out of your mind onto your breathing, and you can focus on the airflow coming in and out of the nose, the slightly colder air coming into your nose, and the slightly warmer air leaving the nose. And as you're taking that soft breath into your nose, really slow down the speed of the breath coming into the nose. Can you breathe in almost that your breath in is imperceptible? So you're taking a very soft, gentle breath coming into your nose, and a really relaxed and a slow and a gentle exhalation. And then on the next breath, you're slowing down your breathing so much that number one is you cannot hear it, but you cannot feel it. That your breath is so light. And this is the saying that your breathing is so light that the fine hairs within the nostrils do not move. And then you're having a relaxed and a slow and a gentle exhalation. And we continue this for about 3 to 4 minutes. Now, number one is that your attention is on your breath. You're training your brain to hold attention on your breathing. And your attention is more anchored onto the breath when you have air hunger. Number two, the whole purpose of this is to take less air into the body to build carbon dioxide up in the blood, because when you breathe less air, carbon dioxide cannot leave the body so quickly through the lungs. So you have an accumulation of carbon dioxide in the blood. You know this when you feel the air hunger. So the objective here is to feel slightly suffocated, slightly breathless, a feeling that you need to take in more breath. And keep on just gently slowing down your breathing. And the ironic thing about this is that as you breathe less air and carbon dioxide increases in your blood vessels dilate. But also there's what's called the right shift of the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve. Hemoglobin releases oxygen more readily. So even though you're breathing less air, you've got increased oxygen delivery to the tissues. This can have a calming effect. So on one hand, you're feeling air hunger, which is a bit of a stressor. But on the other hand, the physiology, you're stimulating the vagus nerve. And you know that you're doing this if you feel increased watery saliva in your mouth. So it's very important for people to be able to recover. Recovery the night before, recovery post-match practice. How do you down-regulate? Because now there's much more emphasis, say, on heart rate variability, which is an objective measurement of vagal tone. And the devices are giving you feedback of where you're at. And, if your HRV is reduced too much, maybe you should take it easier the next day. Don't train so hard because you have an increased risk of injury. But what's often overlooked is, how do you optimize your HRV? And one of the main ways of doing this is by changing your breathing patterns. The breathe light exercise, as you do it, and you're feeling that air hunger, your HRV will dip. But after the exercise, your HRV will increase. So the breathe light exercise is a little bit of a stressor, but at the same time, it's helping to activate the body's relaxation response. It's kind of a strange one. And you know that you're activating the relaxation response by virtue of the increased watery saliva in the mouth, because when we as human beings are ready for the digestion of food, our mouth becomes watery. And we know then that we are going into that rest and digest state. So I often say to athletes, especially the night before a game, you want to have the deepest sleep and you want to wake up feeling fully recovered. And it's a great place to start. Don't be looking at your mobile phones. Practice sleep hygiene. Your cool bedroom, your airy bedroom, silent bedroom, but down regulate. And for 10 to 15 minutes before sleep, really slow down your breathing to down regulate. You will feel drowsy, you will have increased watery saliva, and you'll sleep deeper. So the other thing that I would say is that the elephant in the room when it comes to sleep is breathing in and out through the nose. It's so, so important. And I would say that 50% of the athletes listening to this today, or 50% of the listeners, are waking up with a dry mouth in the morning. You should never wake up with a dry mouth in the morning. If you wake up with a dry mouth in the morning, you're more likely to have faster breathing, upper chest breathing, more likely to snore, to have obstructive sleep apnea, but also to get up to go to the bathroom during the middle of the night. We should never have to get up to go to the bathroom during the middle of the night. If we have to get up to go to the bathroom during the middle of the night, our sleep has been disrupted. So there's a time there that we have physically woken up to go to the bathroom. Shouldn't happen. But if we have the mouth open, it increases that.
Yeah, it's funny. We kind of normalize snoring. Like it's just like a joke that we all talk about, like, oh, my husband snores or whatever. And it's like, that's not normal. We should probably take care of that.
Yes.
What's the deal with mouth taping? I know you talk about that in the book. I've tried that a little bit. It worked pretty well for me. I know some people are like, well, my nose is too stopped and I can't put tape on my mouth, or I feel like I'm not going to be breathing at night. Is that something that you would recommend for people?
Totally. And we have our own tape, and I don't want to plug it, but we do have our own tape which surrounds the mouth, because a lot of people think this is so off the wall, taping the mouth closed at night. The tape that we use is an elasticated strip, kinesio tape, and it's stretchable and it's specifically formulated for around the mouth. So you stretch it and it brings the lips together, but without covering the lips. Again, nobody should be waking up with a dry mouth in the morning. See, the thing about the human nose is that the more you use it, the better it works. And if somebody has a stuffy nose, practice this exercise. Now, don't do it if you're pregnant. Don't do it if you have any serious medical conditions, but it's actually pretty safe. So what you can do is get your mobile phone and you can breathe onto the screen. So I don't have my mobile phone close, so I'm going to use my diary. You breathe onto the screen and you look at the halo that's left on the screen from your breath, and you get an idea there. You don't even have to do that, but it might give you an idea of which side of the nose is more open than the other. Then stand up, take a normal breath in through your nose and out through your nose, and pinch your nose and hold your nose, and just start walking around the room. And walk around the room until you build up a moderate to strong air hunger. Then let go of your nose, breathe in through your nose and get your breathing under recovery. Wait about a minute with normal breathing and do it again. Do it 5 or 6 times. Your nose opens up. Your nose is stuffy when your Bolt score is less than 25 seconds. Get your Bolt score above 25 seconds. And if you have a reversible nasal obstruction, your nose will be much more open. Now, granted, elbows to the nose, punch to the nose, there's a mechanical trauma going on there. But at the same time, the vast majority of people can still breathe through their nose to a point that if the deviated septum is so bad, but we use a rule of thumb. If you can breathe through your nose for 1 minute, you can do it for life. And we also have some athletes use nasal dilators. So if you put one finger here and one finger here, and you just gently prise your nostrils, you'll feel that it's easier to breathe through the nose. So during training, we use little nasal. I don't have them here either. I have prepared nothing. So you have a nasal dilator that's opening up the nose. And at least now you wouldn't wear this during a game, but you could wear it if you're going for a jog or if you're in the gym by yourself and you're doing your own routine. At least it allows you to maintain nasal breathing to get the benefits of it, but it just helps to open up the anatomy so that you can add an extra load onto your body.
Love it. So do whatever you can to get air in through the nose, whether that's dilator, whether that's the breath holding exercises. And then while you're in that good state where you can get air in, start breathing through the nose. And the more you do that, the more it'll just become kind of second nature and it'll naturally open up. I know people who have had 5, 6, 7 deviated septum surgeries, and that deviated septum just keeps coming back for whatever reason. And these aren't athletes that I'm talking about where they're getting elbowed. Is this something that you feel like could be prevented through this kind of stuff? Like just use your nose better and you're not going to develop that deviated septum? Because I know you talk about how, lack of nasal breathing can change the physical structure of our nose, of our jaw. What are your thoughts on that?
The lack of nose breathing can absolutely change the physical structure of our face when we're young. So a child that's hanging with the mouth hanging open, a child that's sleeping with the mouth open, a child who is persistently breathing through the mouth during the day, their tongue isn't resting in the roof of the mouth. And it's the pressures exerted by the tongue which help to develop the maxilla, which is the top jaw. We know that a lot of kids have craniofacial abnormalities because of the amount of children who need orthodontic treatment because of crooked teeth. It's not that the teeth are too big. The problem is that the jaw is too small. The jaw is too small to house the existing teeth, and that's why there's overcrowding of teeth. Now, the problem with a small jaw is that there's not enough room for the tongue. And if there's not enough room for the tongue, it encroaches the airway. If you look at the faces of athletes, they're typically good-looking individuals. Now, there's a few exceptions, but in the main, they're typically good-looking individuals because their face has grown the way nature has intended and they've got a decent airway. I would never be able to be an athlete in a million years because I've got the airway the size of a cocktail stick. And this is why when I was growing up with my mouth hanging open, that I had obstructive sleep apnea and all of those issues associated with it. Now, the human body is very adaptable, and that's where my work for myself has made a big difference. I'm going to say this though. Those people that you talked about that had surgery on their nose, how many of them actually breathed through their nose post-surgery? Because unfortunately, what happens is you go into your ear, nose, and throat doctor, the doctor does the surgery works, but there is no advice on breathing through your nose post-surgery. And if you think of an individual with a broken nose or chronic rhinitis where their nose is stuffy, they have developed mouth breathing habit. So even when you fix the nose, it's not enough. You have to also change the habit. So I would say to those individuals, maybe they didn't need 5 surgeries. Why did they need 5 surgeries? They kept on going back to the ear, nose, and throat doctor saying, "Doctor, it just doesn't feel comfortable when I breathe through my nose." And the reason being is because they weren't using it. If you continue to breathe through your nose will work so much better. And I'll also say this, those individuals with repeated nose surgeries, they are tired. They are waking up feeling tired in the morning. Because if you have a stuffy nose, you are 2 to 3 times more likely to have moderate to severe sleep disorder breathing. So, and the other thing is, men with sleep disorder breathing are prone to erectile dysfunction. And sometimes that can be a good motivator for the man as well. You know, you should be waking up with an erection in the morning. It's really, really important because it's telling you that your blood vessels are working the way they should be. But if you have sleep disorder breathing, it's contributing to erectile dysfunction. And erectile dysfunction can point that there's other things going on, that the blood vessels are not working the way they should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for all the athletes out there, when we talk about recovery, I mean, just the way that you're breathing at night is so important. Like if you talk about, okay, we're breaking down our muscles and our tendons during the day and then we repair at night, but if you're breathing through if you're waking up with a dry mouth and you're breathing through the mouth at night, you're not optimizing that recovery. And then you go break down the tendon more and more and more during the day, and that's how the tendinopathies start and, ruptures. Like, I don't think people look at that and go, maybe it's not my training. Sometimes it's not the nutrition, even though these things are very important. Maybe it is literally just how I'm breathing at night. Do you recommend, because when I had problems with my breathing years ago, I was waking up with a dry mouth, and I went to the doctor, and they said, well, we don't need to do a sleep study on you because you don't fit the typical description of somebody with sleep apnea, because they're looking for somebody who's obese. What would somebody like me do? We're an athlete, and we go to the doctor, and they say, well, you don't fit that bill. Like that, it's probably not the problem. Do you start with just the nasal breathing stuff, taping the mouth, or do you think you should do like an actual sleep study?
Well, you could do a sleep study because it's absolutely no harm, 50% of people with obstructive sleep apnea are not obese. So straight off. And 25% are not tired. Neither subjectively nor objectively are they tired the following day. I wrote a paper with 2 ear, nose, and throat doctors, which was published in January of last year, breathing and the phenotypes of sleep apnea. looking at the importance of how you breathe during the day, how it impacts your breathing during sleep. So if we have faulty breathing during the day, if our Bolt score is less than 25 seconds, I'm not talking about 22 seconds or 21 seconds. I'm talking about if your Bolt score is 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 seconds and around there. That implies that your breathing is harder and faster. And when we think of turbulence in the airway, it's not just the anatomy that we need to be considering. The doctor looks solely at the anatomy. They're looking at how big is the pipe, but they're not asking the question, what's actually going through it? Because the harder and the faster you breathe, the greater the friction that's developed as you're breathing through that narrow airway. So what we're saying is, let's change your breathing pattern so that your breathing isn't hard and fast. Your breathing is becoming lighter. And by doing this, we can reduce turbulence. And also we want to be breathing nose slow and low, because when we breathe with optimal movement of the diaphragm, it doesn't just impact our movement or the emotions, but the diaphragm breathing muscle is also mechanically linked with the airway dilator muscles in the throat. So we have to think of the airway as one airway. And if the lower part of the airway, if the lungs and the diaphragm are not working as best as they should be, that's going to impact the upper airway and vice versa. So I think there's a huge role for this in sleep. And the other thing, Paul, is, if you were to get a positive diagnosis of obstructive sleep apnea, the gold standard of treatment is a CPAP machine. Now, a CPAP machine is what's called continuous positive airway pressure. It works, but it's a device whereby you're wearing a face mask or a nasal cannula, and it's forcing air down your throat at a sufficient pressure to splint open the airways. And the problem is, it's not sexy. So you think of young guys or gals, and you have a bed partner and you want to kind of look your best and you're jumping into bed with this big device. Well, that's the device gone straight off. And number two is the compliance is not high. 50% of people can't tolerate it. So even if you got a positive diagnosis of obstructive sleep apnea, what is the best treatment out there available? The CPAP machine, which 50% of the population can't tolerate. Mandibular advancement, which works, but can put a lot of pressure on the TMJ, the temporomandibular joint. So, and I'm not saying that I'm not anti any of these, but the reason that breathing has not taken off is because you cannot scale it. I will never be a multi-millionaire from teaching breathing exercises because it's just something that's free. And I put it into a book. And yes, of course, I have a lovely living from it, but we're not going to get the research because it doesn't promise the big profit that is normally available for devices in the sleep industry. And it is a big industry. It's a multi-billion dollar industry worldwide. 30% of men suffer from obstructive sleep apnea. 30%, depending on the age, and especially as they get a bit older as well. And the other thing I say is, if you say, for example, your athletes are really working hard during the day and you're stressing the heart, which is good by doing physical exercise. But then if you're stopping breathing during sleep, you're also stressing the heart, which is not good. The heart is not getting recovery. And then when I hear of more so the bigger guys, like oftentimes it's the rugby guys, the big guys with a larger neck circumference, and I'm 48 years of age, and I'm hearing of a guy of a 40-year-old, and he's after dying because of a heart attack. And I'm just thinking to myself, did anybody ask, how is this guy sleeping?
Yeah, absolutely. I saw you guys had a post on the soccer player stuff. There's like 5 guys that are getting these like heart arrhythmias. I don't know the exact diagnosis, but all of a sudden these guys who are in great shape are like, there's like 5 of them this year that are out. And I think you mentioned like some of these guys are having their mouth open at all times. You could just see the pictures and they're not nasal breathing. And I think it's tough for people to make that connection because it seems like 2 different worlds, but it's not.
Totally. And the post wasn't perfect either. I didn't write the article, even though I put a chapter about it into the book, The Oxygen Advantage. The article was written by a physiologist, but the post should have been changed. It wasn't necessarily mouth breathing. It's hyperventilation. The only thing is, though, if you're breathing hard and fast through the mouth, you would be more likely to hyperventilate than if you were breathing through your nose. And the article drew a lot of criticism, which I suppose, okay. But the people who were making the criticism don't realize that if you're breathing harder and faster and you're blowing off too much carbon dioxide from the blood through the lungs, blood vessels constrict. And the heart is not just the organ that is here for pumping blood throughout the body. The heart needs its own blood flow, its own blood supply, and its own oxygen delivery. So when we breathe hard and fast and our blood vessels are constricting, we can be depriving the heart of blood and oxygen delivery. And it has been shown, and I put that chapter back in 2016 into the oxygen advantage, that the electrical conduct of the heart can be affected as a result of hyperventilation. And even in the real world, when CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation professionals, were coming across a victim, and if they gave them too much ventilation, it showed that they were killing the victim. And since 2007 or 2008, going back not a whole long time ago, they have removed ventilation and they only now do chest compressions. They didn't remove ventilation because of hygiene. They removed ventilation because a professional coming across a victim overzealous, just giving the person too much air, and it was having a negative effect.
Wow. Going back to the biomechanics a little bit, one thought that I always have is just like, how is our society, the way that we live our lives, affecting just our structure? Like, for example, forward head posture. Can this influence nasal breathing negatively? We're looking down at our phones, which you put yourself in that position over and over again. Maybe you have some adaptations. Maybe that messes with the airway. Maybe we just sit too much and that causes changes at the pelvis, which causes changes all the way up the lumbar curve, which causes that forward head posture. Is there anything that you're looking at with like I said, just a forward head posture influencing the ability to open up or to constrict the airways?
Oh, I would say without a doubt. The airway is a pipe and we want to kind of keep that. If we are absolutely in alignment, the pipe is in alignment. But if we have forward tilt, the airway already is compromised. And even during sleep, the airway can be compromised. The size of your pillow. If your head is back, your airway is compromised. If it's too forward, if it's to one side, if it's to the other, your head can be compromised. But mouth breathing can contribute to forward head posture. So say, for example, you have a growing kid that has the mouth open. Their tongue is not going to be resting in the roof of the mouth because you cannot mouth breathe with your tongue resting in the roof of the mouth. So the tongue has to drop. Then the tongue is more likely to encroach the airway. So the child will push their head forward to try and open and maximize the airway. So I would say that there's a kind of a bidirectional relationship there, that open mouth breathing is feeding into forward head posture, but also text neck and the habits that you explained. Our posture is feeding into poor breathing. I don't think we can isolate posture and breathing. The two of them are absolutely linked.
Mm-hmm. Kind of chicken or the egg, like we don't know which one's coming first.
Yes.
Yeah, and then as far as you talked about through the nose, you talked about slow and then low. And what do you mean by the low? Is that kind of just diaphragm? I've heard you mention like let's get some lateral expansion of the ribs. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's like when we take a breath in, basically the brain, the primitive part of the brain at the back of the brain is sending a message via the phrenic nerve to the diaphragm breathing muscle. And the diaphragm breathing muscle is a sheet of muscle that separates the chest from the abdomen. So the brain sends a message to the diaphragm, and the diaphragm moves down during rest by about 2 to 3 centimeters. And the intercostal muscles at the sides of the ribs are pulling outwards. And this increases the volume of the thorax, which reduces the pressure inside the chest, which causes an inhalation. So during inhalation, the diaphragm is moving downwards. But during exhalation, we need the diaphragm to move back up to its resting position. And it's the movement back of the diaphragm back up to its resting position that is going to influence the next inhalation. But say, for example, you have an individual that breathes out, but they don't have a full breath or a normal breath out. They have a partial breath out, and their diaphragm only moves back but remains flatter. This in turn then is going to impact what's called the zone of apposition. So the zone of apposition is the distance from the top of the diaphragm down to the lower ribs. And this in turn then is going to influence intra-abdominal pressure. So I always have my students, I say, listen, if you breathe through your mouth, what part of the body is it engaging? And I say to them, look down at your mouth and take a breath through the mouth. Sorry, look down at your chest and take a breath through the mouth, and you'll see that mouth breathing is engaging the upper chest. Nose breathing is a better recruitment of the diaphragm. And when you have your hands either side of your lower ribs, as you breathe in, you want to be able to see, as you breathe in, can you push the lower ribs out? Because it takes intra-abdominal pressure to push the ribs outwards. So it's the lateral expansion and contraction of the lower ribs, which is a gauge for the generation of intra-abdominal pressure. Now, it's known in the literature that 50% of people with lower back pain have dysfunctional breathing. This, again, could be a case of chicken and egg. The person with lower back pain, they may likely then drive their breathing to the upper chest. But we also have to think that if you have an individual who is already breathing dysfunctionally, they're not getting the adequate support from the diaphragm to provide stabilization for the spine. And could this be contributing to lower back pain? And I have seen some individuals that when they switch from mouth to nose breathing, because I don't work with lower back pain, but they've sent me emails saying that it has helped their lower back pain. I think there is a connection there.
Big time. I'm a big believer in that. I've had clients with low back pain or in mid back pain, upper back, really anything. And, you know, nothing can get it to go away, but you get them to just lay down and breathe for 10 minutes. And then you ask them about their symptoms and they're like, I feel great. For the first time in a long time, yes. I feel great. And if it makes that change temporarily, you just imagine, okay, what if I just continuously breathe like this throughout the day? You know, that acute yes. change is going to turn into a chronic change over time. So yeah, I'm a huge believer in that. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. Can we do a quick speed round? So I asked my followers any questions that they have for you, and we'll go through these ones pretty quick. Breathing techniques to sleep faster. You might have touched on this a little bit, but any like quick practical techniques to fall asleep faster?
It's very important to down regulate. How do you down regulate? Breathe light and breathe slow. And always think of the exhalation. So when I'm talking about breathing light, breathe with almost imperceptible breathing, that you're really softening the speed of the breath in and you're having a slow and relaxed breath out. So both the breathe light and the breathe slow will help you to downregulate and you will fall asleep faster. You will know by increased watery saliva in the mouth and you'll know by a feeling of drowsiness. Do it for about 10 to 15 minutes, but don't have the mouth open. And if I can mention the tape that we do, it's called MyoTape, if that's all right. It's just that it's an and it's quite cheap. It's $25 for a 3-month supply and it brings the lips together. So it has that safety in mind as well.
What's the website for that? Where can we find that?
It's called myotape.com. So it's myotape.com.
And we'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. Thoughts on sticking the tongue on the top of the mouth while nasal breathing?
It's absolutely vital. We should have 3/4 of our tongue resting up against the palate. We don't necessarily want to have our tongue pushing against the front teeth because the tongue can be quite powerful. But I often say to the kids coming in, do the pop sound, and it goes like this. So in order to make that sound, you have to press your tongue against the palate. That's where your tongue should be. And we should also wake up with our tongue resting in the roof of the mouth, because if your tongue is resting in the roof of the mouth, you're taking it out of the airway. So remember, during sleep, we want to kind of open this airway as much as possible by having the mouth closed, the lips together, but the tongue resting up in the roof of the mouth.
And when you say resting against the roof of the mouth, is there pressure there? Is there like 10% of your max pressure, or is there?
It's a very light pressure. It's a kind of a suction as well. It's almost that it's just sucked there, positioned. And it's not just the tip of the tongue. You're looking to get quite a lot. 3/4 is typically what we say now. I'm not sure if it's exactly 3/4, but a good amount of the tongue up there.
Okay, awesome. Best way to calm down the nervous system. You kind of touched on this already. You mentioned on the out breath is where kind of the relaxation is occurring.
Yes.
So if you're after like maximal relaxation, would it make sense to do a longer exhale than inhale?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. The speed of the inhalation doesn't matter so much. You could take a slow inhalation or you could take a fast inhalation. The key is the exhalation. If you breathe out fast, it's a stressor. If you breathe out slow and relaxed, and even to prolong it, you're telling the body that everything is okay. Now, you could also practice 4-6, breathing in for 4 seconds and breathing out for 6 seconds. And that will also help. You know, if the length of the exhalation is quite long, it's very important to stimulate the vagus nerve to help with recovery. And I'd also do it post-physical exercise, you know, and pre-match and different things. Whenever a person is feeling ramped up, it's really important. Like I've had, say, Zoom meetings, and I could have, we were talking about technology earlier on, and I'm absolutely useless with it. 50 or 60 people in a Zoom meeting. And of course, I'm in the wrong meeting, but I'm the one that's presenting it. We have 50 or 60 people waiting. And I had a time that, where's the link? You know, I just brought my attention onto my breathing, taking a very soft breath in, really slow, relaxed breath out. And all it takes is 90 seconds. So the wonderful thing about this is that they're always at our disposal, and there's a time when things go wrong. Bring your attention inwards, slow down the exhalation.
Awesome. Couple more. Should we bend over when conditioning? So I think what they mean is like, you got this, you know, coaches tell you, get your hands on your head, get up high. Athletes intuitively, naturally just want to come down to their knees and relax there when they're really tired. Do you have any thoughts on if is one of those right?
I don't. It's a good question. So I don't know the answer. I don't know. I have no opinion on it.
Okay. How does nasal breathing help with weight loss? Is there a connection there?
Yeah, in the book, The Oxygen Advantage, I put in a section on weight loss. I probably would take it out if I was to do it again. The reason that I was talking about weight loss was because of the connection between sleep and weight. If we have disrupted sleep, which can be impacted by our breathing, it messes up hormones such as leptin and ghrelin. And ghrelin, for example, stimulates appetite. So the individual with poor sleep is likely to eat more, but because they eat more, they're putting on a bit of weight, which in turn is going to narrow their airway and contributing to their sleep issues. The other thing from a weight loss point of view is balance of the autonomic nervous system is very important. You know, when we're feeling stressed, there's a tendency to want to go to the comfort of the fridge or the cupboard to start eating more and eating the wrong sort of foods and also drinking beer. Yeah. But if we have some balance there, we have a little bit more control over what we're doing. So that end of it, now I have seen people lose weight, but I have not seen it being produced. I can't always say that a person coming in through the door, you're going to shed it. But I will say this, if you have somebody in a weight loss program, if they are having disrupted sleep and if they have dysfunctional breathing, it's going to hold them back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can attest to that. One thing about weight loss is we need to just be healthier as humans. Sleep and everything, being able to downregulate, getting the parasympathetic, decrease stress because the hormones will start to throw it off. You get too high of cortisol, that can affect your weight gain. So yeah, maybe not like directly you start nasal breathing and all of a sudden you have a six pack, but become a healthier human, and along with the nutrition and the exercise, it all goes hand in hand. Love it. Okay, I want to be respectful of your time, so I'm going to let you go. Where can the people find you on social media?
So we have two channels. One is Oxygen Advantage. Oxygen Advantage is the main channel in terms of performance. And there's quite a few books as well. I've got 9 books out there. The most recent one is called The Breathing Cure, but it's very much health oriented. And I've got a new one called Atomic Focus, which is specifically about training the brain. Attention, concentration. And I think it's very important. Similar techniques, like the techniques, of course, are always going to be an overlap, but it's the direction of the techniques that's important. So yeah, and there's videos. I put a video out specifically on changing states. You'll see it on our YouTube channel as well. It's Oxygen Advantage also.
Awesome. Well, I'm just now finally taking in the Oxygen Advantage and finally putting it into practice. And now I got 2 more books that I got to jump on. So you said the Atomic what?
Atomic Focus.
Atomic Focus. Is that out or that's coming out?
Yeah, no, it's out as well. Yeah. And the other one is The Breathing Cure. The Breathing Cure is a little bit of a nerdy book in terms of breathing. It's a big one. It's 190,000 words. Wouldn't be for everybody. Whereas if you're really an avid reader and an academic, I would say go for Breathing Cure. If you just want to get a simple way of getting the exercises, the atomic focus.
Yeah, so probably a lot of the athletes listening to this, atomic focus, because they're not trying to become scientists. They just want the practical takeaways.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you being on. I think our listeners are going to get so much from this. So appreciate it, and hopefully we can have another conversation in the future.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, Paul.
All right. Have a good one, Patrick.